All right, good afternoon, everyone. We will call the November 4th Budget and Finance Committee meeting to order. At this point, I will entertain a motion to approve the October 28th, 2025 board meeting, committee meeting minutes.
Vice Chair Swanson, I would move approval of the aforementioned Budget and Finance Committee meeting minutes.
Thank you, Chair Haggerty. Is there a second? Seconded by Dr. Ng. All in favor, let it be known by the sign of aye. Opposed?
Aye. Aye.
All right, the ayes have it. The meeting minutes pass unanimously.
Vice Chair Swanson,
Yes, sir.
because we do have two of our members joining virtual today, Ms. Edmonds and Ms. Gordon, even though a lot of the work we do in committee isn't necessarily binding, I would like to ask if we could do a roll call vote for any other votes that we do, just because it will help with the minutes if they state their name and their vote when we do those.
Perfect. Would you like
I
me?
don't know that we need a motion. That's just a request for you as the chair.
Perfect. Would you want me to do a roll call vote for the minutes that we just passed?
Sure.
Okay. We'll do a roll call vote, and we'll start with Ms. Edmonds.
Aye.
Ms. Gordon?
Aye.
Dr. Ng?
Aye.
Chair Haggerty?
Aye.
Ms. Caulfield?
Aye.
And I'm also an aye, so the minutes pass unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Nieder, we'll pass it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Swanson, and good afternoon, board members and Superintendent Taylor. Could I ask that the presentation be thrown up? Perfect. So today, what we're going to do is give you a very brief recap of the budget development process for the 25-26 fiscal year thus far, and share with you where we're at now, and perhaps the most important thing we'll share today are recommended adjustments to the board's proposed 25-26 budget to bring it into alignment with the final county budget for the current fiscal year, as well as where the state currently is with their budget development process for the current 2025-26 fiscal year. And I'll touch a bit more on the state status in the legislature in a few slides. So going back to May 6th, the board on May 6th approved a proposed budget for the 25-26 fiscal year, and a couple weeks later, or a week later actually, submitted that to the county commissioners for consideration. On May 22nd, there was a work session that the county commissioners had, that staff and board membership, actually board leadership, attended that commissioners meeting as well to both do a presentation and answer any of the commissioners' questions. And then at their first June meeting, the commissioners approved their 25-26 budget, and it fully funded the request from the Board of Education for an increase in county appropriation of just over $40 million, $40.3 million. Then at your second board meeting in June, June 24th, there was still no state budget in place, and that's typical. And we asked the board to consider, and the board approved an interim budget resolution, which has allowed the board to begin the new fiscal year July 1st and continue to operate, albeit at prior year or 24-25 funding levels. So looking at the state, we know that the county has an established budget in place for the current fiscal year. Back in April, mid-April, the Senate passed their version of its state budget. A few weeks later, on May 22nd, the House passed their version of a state budget, and that would have been a biennial budget for 2 years, the 25-26 year and the 26-27 year. as of July 1st, the state had not reached any type of resolution, so the state began operating under what they call a continuing resolution. In some ways, it's their version of the board's interim budget resolution. At the end of July, the legislature still had not agreed upon a formal comprehensive state budget, but they did reach agreement on what became House Bill 125, and I'll share a little bit more about what's in it and what's pertinent to the school district. And then a week later, on August 6th, the governor signed that House Bill 125 into law. I want to stress that House Bill 125 is not a comprehensive state budget for a 2-year period. It is a very, I'll call it a mini budget. I didn't invent that term. I'm not sure I like it, but it seems to be the common vernacular, so I'll stick with it. But it's very limited in scope. And at this time, we do not anticipate any further action on the part of the legislature as it relates to establishing a comprehensive budget for the 25-26 year. That could change, but we don't anticipate it. That's based on conversations with senior staff at the Department of Public Instruction, other people that are connected to the legislature, and again, that's why we're here making recommendations to reconcile the board's proposed budget to a final budget resolution. We normally would not do that until a comprehensive budget is in place at the state. But since that does not seem likely near term, that explains why we're doing things a little bit different than normal. And the last thing I'll say on that is the operating budget is a fluid thing throughout the year, and even once the board adopts and approves a final budget resolution, changes will be made to that budget, and they're presented to you monthly through reporting to the board. And so even if the state comes back and does develop a comprehensive budget, we would just make recommendations and then make amendments to the established budget by the resolution. So House Bill 125, I do want to just briefly share what's in it that is pertinent to LEAs across the state and obviously Wake County Public Schools. One big thing in there is it was a technical adjustment, just over $104 million, and that's for the state. That's not an amount related to Wake County, but it's a statewide amount, which essentially put funding back in to the budget for the current fiscal year that more or less was in the budget last year, but would not have continued into this year. So without that action, the Department of Public Instruction would have been running about $104 million, give or take, short of funding that they had in the prior year. It's not exact. There are a little bit more to the ins and outs, but that was a very important technical adjustment on the part of the legislature. That was approved. And then the other main thing that impacts Wake County that was approved in this House bill were step increases for our certified staff. And let me be clear, because there are some certified, a school administrator can't be considered certified. This does not apply to them. So I'll go through a list on the next slide of who this does not apply to. But our certified staff are our teachers and our other instructional support positions that are paid off one of the certified schedules in our salary schedules. And what the legislature did approve, it's not really a pay increase, but it's a step increase, which will result in a slight increase in compensation for some, but not all certified staff. And in addition to that, it was approved that existing teacher growth bonuses and principal growth bonuses that have been established for many years now. They have been approved for the current year as well, that if an individual qualifies, that they can be paid. So who's covered by this step increase? Our teachers, our other certified instructional support staff, our assistant principals, and the reason that they're covered by this step increase is their pay is based on the teacher A0 schedule with a 19% differential, and because that schedule for teachers is, anyone on it is getting a step increase, our assistant principals would see the same. That said, that step increase does not apply to every step. There are a number of steps where an individual would go from step X to step X plus 1, where there's no change in the dollar amount on that step. So for many of our staff, even though they're on that schedule, they will not see an increase. So teachers, certified instructional support, assistant principals, and our OTs and PTs will receive a step increase as well to align them with our speech language pathologists. They're not on a certified schedule. They can't be, but that's a local decision so that we can keep the OTs and PTs and speech language pathologists all aligned with each other. So, employees not included in any kind of step increase or other compensation increase, pretty much everybody else. Our school principals, all of our central office staff, whether they're support staff, administrative staff, technology banded positions, and all of our classified central and school-based staff, including all of our bus drivers, our child nutrition workers, custodians, front office staff in the schools, instructional assistants, basically everybody else will not see, unless something changes, any compensation increase. And it's not on the slide, but I'll take the opportunity to mention, and that's at the same time that beginning January 1, they will all see significant increases of what their contribution towards their health insurance coverage is with the new state health plan premium structure that goes into place, again, effective January 1. So again, this is just a summary on the compensation. We've adjusted our salary schedules, the certified schedules, based on this legislation. Staff actually received any step increase dollar amounts associated with it back in August, so they're already receiving that. And then in September, they received a retroactive amount that took them back to, made them whole going back to July. And then at this point, the other employees in our district will see no change as far as an increase to compensation. And now I'm going to turn it to Ms. Kimsey, our Senior Director of Budget, to continue getting to some more of the more technical recommendations.
So some of the next few slides are showing you the differences from where the budget was in your proposed budget. Thank you. I appreciate that. The next few slides will show a comparison of your proposed budget to where the budget is now. So it's not a comparison from now to last year. It's just showing you from where the board's budget is to get us to a budget resolution. So state funding now, compared to what was in your board's budget that we had estimated, is $62.6 million less. And the reasons are the differences in those compensation changes that Mr. Nieder just reviewed, where many of our staff are not receiving compensation differences, and the differences for teachers and other certified staff are less than we had estimated. The employer matching benefit rate changes are slightly different than we had estimated. The state has not allotted growth funding yet for this year. We anticipate they will do so, likely in late November, early December. We may or may not get our full adjustment because they will distribute the resources they have pro rata to the districts that grow. and that's not included in the state budget that's distributed to us yet. There was a redistribution of funds to districts in our career and technical education budget and children with disabilities. The state redistributed funds across the state, and that caused some adjustments in our budget. And there are some things that are just timing issues. We would have included in your budget estimates of teacher bonuses and some other categories that the state does not allot to us until later in the year. So they're not in our budget right now until we receive those allocations. And many of those will occur in the next few months or maybe even in January. The next slide is just a little more detail on that. The reason the employee compensation is different is that we had estimated a 3% increase for all staff in your budget, and the only thing that has been approved is the step increase for certified staff. The retirement rate is 1.05% less than we estimated in your budget, and the hospitalization rate is $81 per year per employee more than was in your budget. And I've mentioned the other three items for those funding differences. On the next slide, if we look at federal funding is larger right now than was estimated in your board's budget. The primary reason is that our carryovers in 3 of our grants, in the IDEA Section 611 grants to states, Medicaid, and our magnet grants, the carryover at the end of last year ended up being higher than the program managers had estimated mid-year. The federal funding adjustments, just to break down, restricted grants through the Department of Public Instruction is $10.2 million of the difference. Restricted grants received directly from the federal government, $7.2 million. USDA grants, $312,000, and ROTC, $35,000.
Ms. Kinsey,
Yes.
could you clarify just a little bit more about that? How much, what that, of that 17.7, how much of that is the result of an extra amount carried over versus how much was unexpected new funding? That is,
Yeah.
do we have a surplus there just because we, didn't spend as much, or was there an increase in what was actually allotted?
Yes. This difference is the carryovers being different. It's not new funding higher than we had expected. We actually don't know some of our federal funding for this year until it's allotted a little bit later in the fall. But those estimates have been coming up fairly close to the estimates from our program managers. Each year, as we approach the end of the fiscal year, the program managers will make sure they're maximizing the grants as much as they can, and that they save enough money, particularly to cover the first quarter of expenditures, because we will not have any new federal dollars until October or later. So they will estimate the cost to cover staff during that time. This year, there have been some adjustments, which we'll cover a little bit later, where we had anticipated some positions will be paid from federal funds that are no longer allowed to be paid from federal funds. But this is really just carryover changes in spending patterns, not new resources.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
On the next slide, our local funding is $9.9 million larger than the Board of Education's proposed budget. The county appropriation was fully funded by the commissioners, which was wonderful. They rounded to the next higher amount, so we got $32,000, actually more than you requested from the county. Typically, once the year begins, we will have additional fund balance appropriations, more than what was put to the beginning budget. These are one-time adjustments for carryover purchase orders from the prior year. And there have been 3 requests for fund balance that you have approved since July 1. One was $2 million for targeted assistance for our schools. One was a $600,000 appropriation of some of the Jewel and Altria funds for the spending plan, and another $300,000 is for our property insurance gap for this year. So an additional $5.4 million from fund balance for one-time expenditures. Tuition and fees are $2.8 million higher than anticipated. Looking at our year-end balances in community schools, the carryover is $1.6 million higher than anticipated, and the extended care program is continued this year for $1.2 million. Right now, it's approved to be continued through December. There are some positions that some of our schools are able to fund from their individual school accounts, and those dollars come from contributions from the community. Those adjustments are recorded each year when we receive the donations. So that's $1.1 million increase. Restricted local sources, a $400,000 adjustment. That's in positions that are on loan outside the district, like for the NCAE, and an adjustment for NC Pre-K. And then our child nutrition sales revenues are $0.2 million different than was in your proposed budget. The next slide. So those things I just covered were where revenues are now different than were in your proposed budget. And now I want to cover some expenditure differences that have occurred since July 1. If we had had a budget resolution at the start of the year, you would have seen these type adjustments come into you either as adjustments into our local savings over under or transfers out. Right now, there's still just adjustments to your budget to get to a resolution. So some savings, there's $13.6 million as a plus, where we have saved on the expenditure side. One is $5.2 million. This was money that we received in the last quarter of last year from the state in allotment increases. They should have made them earlier in the year, but had not. So by the time we received the allocations in June, we were already closing the fiscal year. So we reported this to you last year as a savings, and it's a savings now because we received the same budget we received last year. That allowed us to save local funds because we're able to move local employees to use those state funds that came very late in the year and continue to this year. The employee compensation, now that the state did not approve raises at the level we had estimated, we have $4.5 million in local savings because the funds that we had estimated would be needed for raises for our local employees, locally funded employees, and for the local supplement for our certified staff that are state funded is $4.5 million. The changes in employer matching benefits is a savings of $3.5 million, where we had estimated higher than those came in. There was some one-time dollars for early college programming, not required, $300,000. And we did not think we would receive external funding for Spark NC this year, and now we have, so that's a good thing. That saves $100,000. So total savings are $13.6 million on the expenditure side. There are also costs. So on the next slide, I'll review those with you. We never know the full cost of utilities until we have closed the fiscal year in June and paid all the bills that come in July and August that are for June or earlier. So now that we have closed the books, we have closed the audit period, we have all the bills for last year, we know that we need to adjust the utility budget $3.2 million to meet last year's expenditures plus the estimate we had this year for square footage. So that's a cost. We increased the targeted assistance budget to support our schools, another $2.5 million. So there was nothing in the base budget. You approved an appropriation of $2 million in July for targeted assistance, and this is another $2.5 million. So that will bring the total for targeted assistance to $4.5 million for this year. And that is less than the $6 million they've had in previous years. Those are resources to help schools when they need an adjustment beyond formula to deal with class size issues and other things that come up with the allotments for their staffing. The next one is literacy coaches. And I mentioned earlier that we had some positions on federal funding that are no longer allowed. So we were paying our literacy coaches from 3 different funding sources. They were paid from state resources, they were paid from early intervening services, which is a federal grant, and they were paid from Title IV, which is also a federal grant. These are half-time positions in our schools. So there were 2 months from state and local, 2.5 months from early intervening services, and half a month from Title IV to make that 5-month position. What we've learned since July 1, so this was not anticipated at all when your budget was developed, is the state has told us that we can no longer pay the 2.5 months from early intervening services because the district is in disproportionality. So we had lots of meetings with departmental areas to determine a solution in the short term for this. And we have made some adjustments, so we are paying some positions from Title II now, and we are having to support this endeavor with $1.8 million from the local budget to keep those positions whole at 5 months of employment. The year had already begun when we learned of this. These staff are already in place and working and supporting our schools.
And not for today, but I'll go ahead and share with board members. And this is an area, as Terry said, the literacy coaches is for the current year. But as we begin looking, and we are looking into the next year's fiscal year, 26, 27, you'll likely see some changes in how we allot literacy coaches. But again, we're just focused on the current year now.
The next item is also one we could not have foreseen when your budget was developed. Our career and technical education budget is primarily funded with state and federal resources. Those formulas have been standard. They have not fluctuated. We've always received the funding. When we received our state allotments for this year, there was a reduction of $1.8 million to career and technical education for staffing, for our teachers, and for non-personnel for supply dollars. We've corresponded back and forth with the state. When the state says funding in arrears, in some cases, it means the state is funded in arrears, and they still receive this amount of money from the previous year, but they redistribute to districts. So the state looked at the numbers of students, I think it's in 8th and 9th grade and higher, to do the calculation, and when they redistributed what they had available for career and technical education across the districts, our amount is less, $1.8 million. That's unusual, unanticipated. These staff also are already hired and working in our schools, so the short-term solution for this year is to support that with local resources for that difference.
Are you allowed to ask questions as we go?
Yeah.
Would you all like questions now, or do you want us to
Sure.
wait?
Yeah, no, now's fine.
Okay. Ms. Caulfield?
Thank you. I was just curious, because I know how much we've been talking about CTE and everything. Does that mean that the student enrollment is down on CTE?
When the state looks at the distribution of the students in our high, middle school, and high school across the state, and they have a finite amount of money they're redistributing, I don't know the answer on the student number, I don't have that with me, but they redistributed based on the number of students across the state of North Carolina in those grades, and that caused a fluctuation in districts up or down.
So
And
I
it's
was
the
wondering
number
if it
of
was by
students.
need.
No, so what it is our enrollment can actually go up or go down, but they will look at that aggregate number of students across the state and the amount of money that they have to allocate. And so when they do that final calculation, it could actually lead in you getting less money, even though your enrollment has gone up. It's just the pot of money that they have to distribute has changed, regardless of what everybody's enrollment may be. So everybody's going to be subject to the same thing of taking the available money and dividing that among students. And so normally what we would see is the funding stable or increasing, and our enrollment increases, which would result in an increase. But when the overall pot goes down, then everybody in there is going to get less, even though their enrollment may increase or stay the same. So it's less money in the pot from DPI.
And it's independent of the number of students enrolled in the CTE programs.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
it's based on the number of students at those
Total
grade
students.
levels, total students at those grade levels.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm just trying to be clear, because I feel like I'm getting two opposite answers, so I'm not clear on what the answer is. Is it based on how many students we have? Like, do we need to kind of
It is
encourage more students to do it, or?
Yeah, so ultimately, it is the funding that they have available that will determine how much each district will get in terms of enrollment of students. So one of the things that we can go back and look at the enrollment for Wake County and see if that number has increased or decreased. I would assume that it's probably stayed stable and not a big swing in it. But if the pot of money that they have available to give out to every district based on enrollment has gone down, then that means that by default, we will get less money. because the pot is smaller of the funding.
So
It
you're
is
saying
confu-
we have the same amount of kids or more kids, and they decreased not based on per student? They
Correct.
just
And I think that's the
decreased by
information that
pot.
we got from DPI, that the pot went down, correct?
It is confusing, and the answer's not, it's clearly according to a mathematical formula as it would have been in the past. In the past, we would have had the formula times our number of students, and that would have been the answer, and that would have been our allocation. But now that the state has moved into funding in arrears, it appears, based on their answers to our questions, that in some areas, they may have the same amount of money from last year, but the student numbers at every district have changed this year. So when they redistribute it, we get less, which essentially means the funding formula changed a little bit. So in this area, and what David was saying is they base, or Mr. Nieder was saying is that they base it on the number of students at the grade levels, not the number of students in the program. So they're just going to look at those students at those middle and high school grade levels for the math, regardless of if the students are taking career and technical education classes or not.
So is it fair to say that their estimate based on the overall state was an estimate of the percentage, so to speak, of how many of, like, say you had 100 students and 75% of them enrolled, but if our enrollment goes down and we only have 75 students, they're going to use the same calculation in order to see how much they need? Is it fair to say that? I'm just trying to understand.
I think it's fair to say they're staying with the same amount of resources they had the prior year, and that did not go up or down, but because the student numbers changed,
So
it
the
looks different
disbursement
for
is
each district.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
But this one was not what we expected, and the answers we got were not extremely clear, so I understand it's a gray area on this one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I believe Ms. Edmonds has a question. Ms. Edmonds?
Thank you. This was for Mr. Nieder. You said that some of the certified staff were not going to get the step increase. Is that related to the 15-year plateau or unrelated?
Yes, Ms. Edmonds, and let me delineate. Every certified staff member will get an increase in their step. So if they're on step 14 last year, they would move to step 15, or if they were on 15, they would go to 16. But that said, and you recognize that many of those steps, when you go from step X to step X plus 1, there's no change. They're the exact same dollar amounts year over year. And that is the reason. Even though they'll get that step increase, let's say from 15 to 16, the salary amount on those two steps is identical, so they would not see an increase.
That's at the state level.
Got it.
At the state level. There are some very small adjustments in the local supplement, but those would be very, extremely small, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think it's important that we mention that and that we bring that to the public's attention again and again and again about that plateau that exists in the step increases or in the steps, because I think that's really important for just the public to be reminded of that. And then my second question, also for you, Mr. Nieder, with benefits cost up so much, and these, you know, I'll use my own word, paltry, you know, raises from the state in this quote-unquote mini budget. We've heard anecdotally that some teachers are saying that their pay is actually going to go down because of the benefits increases and not having a real state budget. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, Ms. Edmonds, and I think it's fair to say, just looking at the structures of the schedules, I can give a somewhat specific example. For an individual paid off one of the certified schedules, let's just say a teacher, on a step for which there is no increase from going whatever step they were on last year to the current year, they're not seeing a compensation increase, but let's say they're on the state health insurance plan, the vast majority of our staff are, at least covering themselves. They will likely see, but it depends on which plan they're under, a cost increase to their premium. So no increase to their gross pay, an increase to what's withheld from their gross pay that goes on to the state health plan, that would be a net decrease. And for all of our non-certified staff who will see no compensation increase unless there is some legislation introduced and passed, anyone paying an increased premium is going to see a reduction in effect their net pay. And I guess I would add beyond the state health insurance increases, inflation, general inflation is continuing as well, whether it's the price of groceries or whatever. So those will have an erosion in effective wages, or what a dollar buys for any employee.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Swanson. That was all my questions.
Thank you,
Ms.
Ms.
Evans,
Evans.
and I do want to go back to your question about the teacher increases. So I do want to take this opportunity to share so people can look at the teacher scale and would understand that steps 15 through 24 on the salary schedule are the same, and that's 5388. And so those will not be changing. And so what that means is that anyone who is step 15 through 23, they get a step increase, but they won't get an increase. Anybody who is at step 24, they will go to step 25, and that does go from 5388 to 5595, and then it's 25 plus. It does not change. But any teacher that is step 0 through 13, 0 through 14, they will get an increase. So we just want to make sure that we're clear on that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll continue talking about the local cost increases. The next one is salaries and benefits due to increased fill rates. We talked about this some last year too. As we continue to have better fill rates, which is great, and less vacancies, at the current time, when we compare all of our state and local resources with the staff we have now, we needed an adjustment of $1.5 million to cover the salaries and benefits for folks that are hired. We do expect, if we receive additional funds for growth from the state later, that it will help offset some of this, but this is a point-in-time adjustment. Our at-risk student services and alternative programs state allotment decreased $1 million, so we need an adjustment there to cover what we had expected. Our legal cost, based on last year's expenditures, are $700,000 higher than what was in your proposed budget, so we are adjusting that amount. Our interest earned, based on how the year ended last year, came in a little lower than we had expected, so we've adjusted our interest earned revenue down by $500,000. We have a one-time organizational study currently underway, and that was not included in your budget. That was a cost of $100,000. And our Central Carolina Teaching Initiative cost is $100,000. So that is a total increase in the expenditure side of $13.2 million. So if you net the savings and expenditures from the previous slide, which was $13.6 million, with the increased cost of $13.2 million, right now there's about $400,000 net savings based on where we are with how budgets look right now, that we have set aside in the net savings or over-under account that you would see during the year. Because we are hopeful the state will be able to give us some of our growth money, if not all of it. That should help, and it's possible there'll be some more resources at that time, but they do not anticipate that occurring until last week of November or first week of December. Continue. We have some potential risk I just want to remind you of. These were in your budget, and they continue to be a potential risk. So if for some reason, which would be a good thing if the state were to come back and approve compensation changes for staff, we would not have any local funds set aside right now for that. We do not anticipate that happening, but it is a potential risk. Growth funding that I've mentioned from the state, if we do not receive that, that is a potential risk. The charter school budget each year depends on the number of students the charter schools have each month compared to the number of students we have and what our local revenues that come in each month. So right now, we're on target for charter school budget, but that could fluctuate during the year, so we mentioned that as a potential risk. But we do not see an adjustment needed at this time. Child nutrition services is also a concern as we monitor cost compared to revenues that we have. That's a potential risk. We don't know right now what's going to happen with our federal funding. We feel fairly secure about where we are for this year. We are concerned that there will be changes for next year, which could impact how we plan to use the rest of this year's funds to plan for any transition that may happen next year. But at this time, we don't have a lot of details around that. We already mentioned adjustment of $1.5 million for salaries and benefits based on our vacancy rate. So I feel like we're in a good place right now. That could change, but I feel like our estimate right now is good. Our transportation costs each year fluctuate based on a number of factors. So we do mention that because we have to monitor fuel prices, our contract cost for transportation, and our employee salaries, and it can fluctuate based on the number of positions we have filled, which has been improving, which is a wonderful thing. So we'll monitor that through the year. Right now, we feel like we're on target. And then once a year, around this time through December, we have to shore up with the state of North Carolina on our unemployment insurance amount. And our human resources and compensation services staff are looking at that now. So that's a potential risk that we could have a one-time amount due to adjust our unemployment rate. So we plan to bring you the budget resolution for this year to your November 18th meeting. And that simply adjusts the budget from where we were at your budget to where we are now, based on the state and federal resources and local resources we've received. And we've just reviewed with you the large changes that are in that. You would see that also in your monthly packet that you get from us that show the budget changes each month. And we've been giving you that for July, August, September, October. So in October, the October 31 numbers are what we're using for your budget resolution. So from here forward, each month, we would still bring you a packet showing any adjustments from the budget resolution forward. And this is the... Do you have any other questions for us?
Correct. Well, thank you, Ms. Kimsey and Chief Nieder, for presenting this and for accommodating us with this. This is not our usual time slot for budget and finance, but given the fact that we have to vote on our final budget, we thought, Chair Hagan and I thought it was important to bring it to this meeting so board members could, look at it, raise questions before the 18th. Is there any questions that board members may have? Dr. Ian?
Yes, so can you go back and clarify you mentioned about the Jewel and Altria funds that, where was it and how is it in this presentation? I forget where was it sitting in the local you mentioned?
When the funds were received by our district, at the end of the year, those would close into the fund balance. So in our fund balance at the end of the fiscal year, we've reserved the Jewel and Altria funds for that purpose. And I think recently our academics area brought forward a presentation and asked for some of those funds to be allocated for a spending plan this year. So part of those funds are now in the operating budget. The difference is reserved in fund balance.
Yeah, and I believe the amount that the appropriation, which basically an appropriation of fund balance takes this out of this reserved area fund balance and it puts it in your current year budget. And if I'm not mistaken, the amount that was pulled out and the board approved was $600,000. But the remaining amounts from the settlement are still set aside in this reserve for future use.
So, and we were, I think I recall mentioned, talking about the fact that we would put that money back when we do have funds to put it back into the reserve, correct?
So if I could answer that, at one point in the budget, we had considered using a portion of the Jewel settlement to be a part of appropriations, and then we would make sure that that funding was available for future use. But then we decided not to do that. But when academics came forward with the first phase of the programming, that is the amount that's at the 600 and some odd range. And so ultimately, is as our staff have said, that the full amount of the settlement is still there, and they've appropriated the first portion to do this first leg of the work. And so the remaining amount is still in fund balance. So we haven't used any of it for budget purposes other than the work that they're doing based on the Jewel settlement. So.
Chair Hagerty?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Vice Chair Swanson. And just to follow up on Dr. Ng's point, that's an example of a funding decision that then sort of extends the life of the settlement so that we can continue that work into future years. Okay, thank you. Really, I just wanted to thank you for your work. As you see, there's a lot of moving pieces, but then at the end of the day, out of all the money moved around, it's a very small amount of actual adjustment. But I appreciate you bringing all of this to us so that people have an opportunity to see it, ask questions, and so when we go into our formal board meeting, we can approve that continuing resolution for you, that budget adjustment going into the year. So really, it's just a word of appreciation to you all, and then also a word of appreciation to our board members that are joining us remotely so that they can get this briefing in advance too, even though they might have other work conflicts today. So thank you.
Any other questions? Well,
Chair Swanson?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I do have a question. The net local savings of roughly 400,000, like how does that compare to previous years? Like, is that extremely off? Just to give like me a general, like I have a feeling I know what the answer is going to be, but just could you explain, is that number completely off?
Ms. Gordon, that's a great question. And I guess I would begin with, it's just for perhaps the public's understanding, this, what we refer to as over-under. Let me give an explanation of what that really is. But the board has obviously an established budget. Currently, it's an interim budget. But there's a budget. During the year, some of the things that had been budgeted, the expenditures either won't be made, or the expenditure that was intended, the budget was intended for, either is not needed or it's less than what was anticipated. And if that's the case, we will shift those funds or reduce that budget and transfer it into this over-under account as current year savings. At the same time as we're going on throughout the year, the district will face expenditures that were unanticipated, that are not included in the base budget, and this over-under account provides the district a tool, if you will, or a vehicle to have a funding source for those unanticipated, unbudgeted needs. So it's an in and out. And then using that to get to your question, based upon what we've shared with you today, there would be approximately $400,000 remaining as of the date this was done in the account. But even that number will continue to fluctuate throughout the year as things move in and out based upon the criteria of it was savings for budget that we intended to use but didn't need to, or didn't need to use as much of, offset by expenditures that were not budgeted. I don't know that there's ever a definite amount. We've had some years where we've started and been 4, 5, 6 months into the year, and there's been $0 accumulated in that account. There have been other years where we've had a healthier balance early on. I would say it's never an extremely large balance. Maybe the highest, a higher level would be in the millions, but single-digit millions, 1, 2, 3 million, something like that. But it is a tool. Short of going to the board and requesting a fund balance appropriation, it's a day-to-day tool that can be used.
It's
So-
unusual, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's unusual to have the net 400,000 in a budget resolution. But that's only occurring because we're now several months into the year. Typically, if we were bringing you a budget resolution at the start of the year, in many years, our funding that we receive would likely be less than what was requested, either from state, local, or federal, or a combination of. And we would be before the board saying, okay, to adjust your budget request to what was funded, we would usually be bringing you budget adjustments where we'd have to be decreasing something. That's not the case this year. So it's good news that, good and bad news. I mean, it's bad that our employees are not receiving compensation increases. It's good news that we have resources that for the cost we see right now, we have the room to be able to cover those because some things were not funded. And there's that net difference. But typically in a resolution, there would not be any difference right now. That would occur as the year progresses later in the year.
And thank you, Terry, for that. And that's essentially what I was going to say. And the question that you asked Mrs. Gordon, I think is a good one. And what the way I would characterize it is that when we bring a budget to the board, or when the board takes a budget to the county commissioners, we have what we anticipate as revenue and expenses, and those balance out when we bring that budget, knowing that as we go through the year, those numbers are going to fluctuate up and down. But based on what we know now, there's a slight increase in revenue versus what we've anticipated as expenses. And as both Terry and Mr. Nieder said, as we get through the year, those numbers are going to go up and down. But that, I think, would be the difference now, is that we start out with a balance of revenue and expenses that are exactly the same. But as we navigate through the year, they fluctuate up and down. And that's where you see the difference now. So great question.
Yeah.
Dr. Ng?
Thank you.
So to clarify that, I mean, some of the local savings essentially is, I mean, it will go away immediately once we have I mean, because part of it is employee compensation dependent cost, right? The match and some of the other issues that were kind of depending on the salary increase. So eventually, I'm hopeful that we will pass that budget and have a higher pay. Then that savings would go away essentially. Correct?
If the state were to come back and adjust compensation, that would be a possibility. We do not think that will happen. So we think all compensation adjustments have already occurred for the year, and we've accounted for those. So this net savings is truly, at this point, this would be money that we would expect if nothing changed. If we spent just what we have budgeted the rest of the year, this would be money that would be unspent that would roll to our fund balance at the end of the year. But some things will change. It's a very fluid budget, but it's just at this moment in time, that's the differential.
Well, thank you, Ms. Kimsey, Ms. Chief Nieder, for bringing this. And not only are you all moving or dealing with the fluidity of this budget, you're also prepping for the upcoming budget. So the budget never stops. And so thank you all, and looking forward to approving this budget resolution on the 18th. And with that, we will adjourn the Budget and Finance Committee meeting with 1 minute to spare.
Thank you, Vice Chair Swanson.
Yeah, you too.